Imagine you're at a bar having a normal night when a stranger buys you a drink. What you don't know is that the stranger works for the government. The drink is secretly spiked with a powerful hallucinogen, and behind a nearby mirror, agents are watching and taking notes on what happens to your mind. This sounds like paranoid fiction. It is not. For over 20 years, the CIA ran a top-secret program to crack the code of the human mind, and they tested it on unsuspecting American citizens without their knowledge or consent. They called it MKUltra, and when it was over, they tried to destroy every last piece of evidence that it ever existed. This is one of the most disturbing true stories in American history. To understand why the government would do something this insane, you have to feel the fear of the era. This was the early 1950s, the height of the Cold War, and America was gripped by a deep paranoia about its enemies. During the Korean War, American prisoners of war had returned home, and some of them shockingly denounced their own country and praised communism. To a terrified public and government, there seemed to be only one explanation. The enemy must have discovered some sinister technique of brainwashing, a way to reprogram a human being's very mind. The CIA became convinced that the Soviets and the Chinese were building an army of mind-controlled agents, and they decided that America could not afford to fall behind in this new and terrifying race to control the human brain. And so, in 1953, the CIA officially launched the program. It was authorized at the very top by the agency's director, Alan Dulles, and placed in the hands of a brilliant and unnervingly dedicated chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb would become the mastermind of MKUltra, and his mandate was breathtakingly broad and dark: to find a reliable way to control the human mind. This meant researching anything and everything that might do it: drugs, hypnosis, electroshock, sensory deprivation, you name it. The program spread out into a secret web, funneling money through front organizations to fund experiments at universities, hospitals, and prisons across the country, often without the institutions even knowing who was really paying or why. It was a vast, hidden machine built for one purpose: to hack the human being. Of all the tools they investigated, one drug captured the CIA's imagination above all others: LSD. This powerful hallucinogen had been discovered years earlier by a Swiss chemist, and its effects on the mind were so profound and bizarre that the agency became obsessed with its potential. Could it be the ultimate truth serum, forcing enemy spies to spill their secrets? Could it be used to scramble an opponent's mind, or program an agent, or break a person down completely during interrogation? The CIA didn't know, and they were determined to find out. There was just one problem. To understand what LSD did to a person, they needed to give it to people and watch. Lots of people. And that is where MKUltra crossed a line from merely secret into genuinely monstrous. Here is the truly appalling part. The CIA didn't just test LSD on willing volunteers who knew what they were signing up for. In their hunger for realistic data, they dosed people who had absolutely no idea it was happening. They slipped LSD to unwitting citizens, to mental patients, to prisoners, and even, chillingly, to their own agents and employees, sometimes just to see how they'd react to being unexpectedly drugged. Imagine going about your day and suddenly, without warning, reality melts, your thoughts fracture, and you feel like you're losing your mind entirely, with no idea why and no one to help you. That's what was done to people deliberately by their own government in the name of research. Some of these victims suffered terrifying experiences, and some were left with lasting psychological damage. They never consented, most never even knew. And then there was an operation so bizarre it almost sounds made up. It was codenamed, unbelievably, Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA set up secret safehouses, essentially government-run brothels, in San Francisco and New York. They hired sex workers to lure unsuspecting men back to these apartments. And once there, the men would be secretly dosed with LSD in their drinks. Then, from behind a one-way mirror, sometimes reportedly while sipping cocktails, CIA agents would sit and observe the drugged men, studying how the drug affected them, whether it loosened their tongues, and how they behaved under its influence. It was a grotesque violation of these men, who were targeted precisely because they were on the margins of society and unlikely to complain to the police about what had happened to them. Your tax dollars, hard at work. The recklessness of MKUltra caught up with it in a case that has haunted the story ever since. In 1953, a group of scientists, including an Army researcher named Frank Olson, were at a work retreat. Sidney Gottlieb and his team secretly spiked their after-dinner drinks with LSD without telling them. Olson had a severe reaction. In the days that followed, he became deeply disturbed, paranoid, and depressed, spiraling into a crisis. He was taken to New York to see a doctor. And then, in the early hours of the morning, Frank Olson went out of a window on the 10th floor of his hotel and fell to his death. The official story was that he had jumped, a suicide brought on by the LSD. But his family never believed it. Decades later, disturbing questions remain about whether Frank Olson jumped or whether he was pushed to silence him. To this day, his death is not fully resolved. As disturbing as the LSD experiments were, MKUltra went far beyond just drugs. Remember, the goal was total mind control, by any means necessary. So the program also funded some genuinely horrifying research into other methods. Perhaps the most infamous was the work of a respected psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron, whose experiments were funded through a CIA front. In his quest to reprogram the human mind, Cameron subjected his psychiatric patients, people who had come to him for help, to brutal procedures. He would try to erase their existing personalities through massive, repeated doses of electroshock, drug-induced comas that lasted weeks, and forcing them to listen to looped recorded messages for days on end. He called it depatterning. In reality, it often destroyed the people it was done to, leaving them permanently damaged, with shattered memories and broken minds. For 20 years, all of this happened in near-total secrecy. But by the early 1970s, the walls were starting to close in. The country was reeling from scandals, trust in the government was collapsing, and investigations were beginning to poke into the CIA's darkest corners. And the agency knew that if the full truth about MKUltra ever came out, it would be catastrophic. So in 1973, the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, gave a fateful order: destroy the files. Nearly all of the documents, all the records of 2 decades of experiments on unwitting human beings, were deliberately shredded and burned. It was an act designed to make sure the world would never know the full scope of what had been done. And it very nearly worked. But it didn't fully work, and here's the twist that cracked it all open. In the mid-1970s, in the wake of Watergate and other scandals, Congress finally launched serious investigations into the CIA's abuses, most famously through what became known as the Church Committee. Bits and pieces of MKUltra began to surface, and the public got its first horrifying glimpse of the program. But the real break came a couple of years later. It turned out that not all the files had been destroyed. A cache of MKUltra financial records had been accidentally misfiled and stored in the wrong place, and so it survived the shredder. When a journalist obtained these surviving documents through a Freedom of Information request, the paper trail blew the lid off just how vast, systematic, and monstrous the program had truly been. The secret was finally out. So after 20 years, millions of dollars, and untold human suffering, what did the CIA actually achieve? Here's the darkly ironic punchline to the whole nightmare: essentially nothing. Despite all the dosing, the electroshock, the safehouses, and the destroyed lives, MKUltra never produced a reliable method of mind control. There was no truth serum. There was no way to reliably program a person into a puppet. LSD, it turned out, was far too unpredictable and chaotic to be a useful tool of interrogation. It was just as likely to make a subject laugh, panic, or babble nonsense as reveal any secret. The brutal experiments in erasing and rebuilding personalities didn't create obedient agents. They just created broken victims. The entire monstrous program, built on the fear of enemy mind control, was ultimately a costly, cruel, and complete failure at its own goal. In the aftermath, the government was forced to reckon, at least partially, with what it had done. There were Senate hearings where officials squirmed under questioning. Sidney Gottlieb, the mastermind, was called to testify, though the destruction of the files meant he could hide behind a convenient lack of records. Some of the victims and their families eventually sued the government and, in certain cases, won settlements. In the Frank Olson case, his family received a payout and even a rare, direct apology from the President of the United States. But true justice was largely impossible. Because the files had been destroyed, we will never know the full list of victims, the full scope of the experiments, or everything that was done in the shadows. Many people were harmed by their own government and never even learned that MKUltra was the reason their lives had fallen apart. It would be comforting to think of MKUltra as a relic, a paranoid Cold War fever dream that could never happen today. But its real lesson is more unsettling than that. MKUltra is what happens when a powerful institution, gripped by fear and operating in total secrecy, decides that the ends justify any means. The people who ran it weren't cartoon villains. They were officials who had genuinely convinced themselves that violating their fellow citizens was necessary to protect the country. Secrecy removed all accountability, and fear silenced all doubt. That combination, unchecked power, deep secrecy, and a frightening enemy to justify it all, is not unique to the 1950s. It's a permanent temptation. MKUltra survives as a stark, documented warning of exactly how far a government can go when it believes no one is watching, and no one will ever find out. So that's MKUltra, 2 decades in which agents of the United States government secretly drugged their own citizens, funded brutal experiments on the vulnerable, ran secret brothels to study strangers on hallucinogens, and then burned the evidence, all in a failed hunt for a way to control the human mind. It sounds like the most paranoid conspiracy theory imaginable, and yet it is documented, admitted, historical fact. And perhaps the most chilling thought of all is this: because they destroyed nearly all the files, everything we know about MKUltra is only the part they couldn't quite manage to erase. Whatever the full truth was, the people who knew it made very sure it would die with them. If you love history that's true, dark, and told to you straight, no matter how uncomfortable, subscribe. We've got a whole world of it. See you in the next one.